and introduce you all to our speaker this evening. Our speaker's name is Sara Varga, though I have her listed with a different last name on the agenda. Sara is an alumna of Syracuse University, where she completed her undergraduate education, and after working in a domestic violence shelter in Fairfax County, Virginia, she obtained her master's in social work from Catholic University in Washington, D.C. Sara soon realized a desire in working with young adults and adolescents who struggle with substance abuse. She has had the opportunity to work as a wilderness therapist for 2 wilderness programs in upstate New York, and was the clinical director of an intensive outpatient program for dual diagnosed adolescents and young adults that specialized in dialectical behavior therapy. It has been through her work with adolescents struggling with substance abuse that Sara has become keenly aware of the need for such programs as recovery high schools. Seeing so many adolescents struggle with addiction, the transition to recovery can be even more challenging without a network of other sober peers, especially in an educational setting. Sara feels passionately that a recovery high school in Frederick, Maryland would not only meet the needs of the students in recovery, but also the needs of the families and community. So I'd like to introduce Sara for her talk this evening. Sara?
Great, Megan, thank you so much. And thank you all so much for being here. I really appreciate your time and your energy. And I am really excited to talk to you all tonight about a topic that I am incredibly passionate about. And so let me see if my technology will work here and I can figure out how to share my screen and we can get started. Can I do this? Can I do this? Then you all are going to see how many tabs I have open, and it might make some of you anxious. I always have people who are like, why? How do you do that? All right, there we go. Excellent. Okay. So again, my name is Sara Varga. Professionally, I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I get to work here in the city of Frederick for a pretty fantastic mental health agency. And a lot of my passion professionally has been around working with young people who are struggling from substance use disorder. And so tonight I'd like to talk to you about substance use disorder, how it's impacted our country nationally, but also really specifically how it's impacted our local community and some of the things that are happening within the Frederick community to address a lot of the needs in this regard. So Megan introduced me professionally, but let me introduce myself a little bit also personally too, because this is a topic and an issue that impacts me personally. And you know, I draw on you know, my days in undergrad, leaning on the backs of a lot of feminists and knowing that the personal is political, because that's always how it's been for me. And so what is really personal to me about this is that I also identify as being a person in long-term recovery. And so what that means is that I'm somebody who has struggled with substance use disorder. Technically, it would be, I guess, diagnosed as being in remission. But I'm somebody who has navigated this journey in recovery as well. I'm a mother, a wife, sister, daughter. And as you can see, there's a picture here of my fabulous daughter and wearing the Syracuse jersey. I grew up in Syracuse, New York, a huge sports fan. And my daughter has been pleasant enough to follow a little bit in that tradition with me, and like Syracuse too. And as we kind of jump in to the presentation tonight, I also want to recognize that I am probably not the only person here on the Zoom for whom this is a really personal topic. I recognize that substance use disorder and recovery and addiction has a lot of tentacles and has impacted a lot of lives. So as we navigate through this talk tonight, I want to recognize that. And if you need to do anything to take care of yourself, if this is touching on some sticky, difficult places for you, please do that. for yourself. That's my social worker training coming into the forefront here as well, and also my need to be human and to acknowledge that and recognize that. I will also leave you with my contact information at the end of this presentation. And so if there's ever any way I could be of support for anybody here tonight, please don't hesitate to reach out and contact me. So as we kind of dive right in tonight, in order to really understand some of the needs of our community, we need to understand what substance use disorder is. So we're going to get a little technical for a minute. According to SAMHSA, which is one of the government agencies, federal government agencies that, you know, is kind of the warehouse and place where it's a clearinghouse really for mental health and substance abuse treatment. And they help produce a lot of best practices in that regard. Them and NIDA, the National Institute for Drug Addiction, define substance use disorder in this way. It's a disorder that occurs with a recurrent use of alcohol or other drugs, causes clinically significant impairment, including health problems, disability, and failure to meet major responsibilities at school, work, or home. So that's a mouthful. What the heck does that mean, right? What does that mean? What that means is that it is a medical disorder, so it's diagnosable. In a lot of ways, like high blood pressure is diagnosable and a medical disorder. In a lot of ways, like asthma is diagnosable and a medical disorder. However, some of the clear distinctions here are that this impacts the person's life in a variety of areas. So unlike somebody who has, say, asthma, they could take an inhaler and they could feel better. They need to manage, a chronic condition like that throughout their lifetime. Somebody who has substance use disorder is not able to just take some medicine in order to then continue on in their life. They need to do a variety of other things in order to remain in recovery and continue on through their life. But it is also a chronic illness in the same ways that maintaining and taking care of yourself as if you were to have a chronic illness like asthma or diabetes, you need to continue to take care of yourself. The scope of substance use disorder. So let's take a look at what some of the statistics are around how many people nationally are impacted by this. So according to the CDC, in 1999, there were less than 20,000 Americans that died from overdose. So less than about 20,000 Americans. Not even 20 years later, in 2019, the CDC reported that over 70,000 Americans died from overdose. So less 20 years, it more than doubled, more than tripled. And so this is increasingly becoming a very significant problem for our country nationally. And I could probably do a whole other presentation on all of those challenges, because those deaths that I just reported right there don't take into consideration alcohol. They take into consideration prescription or illicit drugs, not alcohol. The NIH estimates that over 95,000 people die annually from alcohol-related causes. That is the third leading cause of preventable death in the United States. So this is a pretty significant problem. And I think we hear a lot about the opioid crisis, and it absolutely is a crisis. We also forget, in my estimation, in my opinion, forget that alcohol is also just as deadly for Americans. So let's jump into a little bit of the science, just a teeny bit, so y'all can have a bit of an estimation of why is this such a tricky disease? Why is it so hard to treat? What is this all about, really? So you can see some brain scans right here. On the very left-hand side is a brain scan of somebody who's just a healthy person. And the part that's yellow and red in there and green are their dopamine receptors. And so for somebody who is a healthy person who doesn't have challenges with substance use disorder, this is what their brain looks like. And the dopamine is that brain chemical that helps us feel really good, right? We like to have those hits of dopamine. I get a hit of dopamine sometimes when I eat chocolate. You know, like I like my dopamine hits these days, at least in the chocolate form. That middle image is the brain scan of somebody who had been abusing methamphetamine after only 1 month of abstinence. And so what happens in the brain of somebody who has substance use disorder is that it impacts the dopamine receptors. And this is just like one impact that it can have on our brains, to where the body stops producing dopamine naturally, and which is why the person needs to continue to use their drug of choice over and over and over again in increasing amounts, and causing all kinds of problems and havoc in the wake of that, doing anything that they can to get that drug because they need to keep getting those hits of dopamine because their body, their brain no longer produces that chemical, or it's very much diminished. The good news is that when somebody enters into recovery, those parts of the brain can be repaired. Their body can repair itself. So the very last picture here is of somebody who was a meth user who's had 14 months of abstinence, 14 months of recovery from methamphetamine. And their receptors are starting to come back online. Their brain and their bodies are starting to heal, and the dopamine receptors are starting to work in the way that they're meant to work within our bodies. Now, one other little, to me, fun tidbit, because I can kind of geek out on this topic sometimes, so bear with me, is that there are recovery programs, 12-step programs. Really well-known one is Alcoholics Anonymous. And in the foreword to Alcoholics Anonymous, what they call their big book, it's their big piece of literature that they read, there's a foreword in there that's written by a doctor who treated those who suffered with substance use disorder in the 1930s, saying that he believed that people who have substance use disorder have a brain disease. And he didn't have this technology back then in the 1930s. We have this technology now. And it really is true. It is in fact true, documented, as you can see here, that, if I were to even put up a slide, somebody who has substance use disorder, when they ingest their substance of choice, different parts of their brain light up compared to somebody who doesn't have substance use disorder. So this is legitimately a brain disease. And again, one thing that's kind of interesting is that it has to be treated like any other chronic illness would need to be treated. And I actually found this interesting. I didn't know this. So relapse can be can be a part of the recovery process for a lot of people. And what can happen is, like hypertension and asthma, the relapse can happen with other chronic illnesses, and it actually happens less. So relapse can be a part of this process. People with substance use disorder, the percentage of people who might relapse are about 40 to 60%. People with hypertension can be at 50 to 70%, and even people with asthma can be up there too. I will touch on this really briefly because I'm sure many of you already know this, that COVID has impacted substance use disorder, people who struggle with mental health challenges. COVID has had so many tentacles. It has impacted so many parts of our lives. In the state of Maryland, especially during the full shutdown, accidental overdose and deaths due to overdose skyrocketed. Nationally, the CDC reported the highest number of overdose deaths in our country in a 12-month period. And in Frederick County just this year, there have been 137 overdoses, 23 of them resulting in death. One of the things that is really tricky about this disease is that unlike asthma or high blood pressure, people don't have a lot of shame about having those diseases. People can have a lot of shame, and there can be a lot of stigma around substance use disorder, which can get in the way of people accessing treatment or feeling safe to do so. And I think it's really important to recognize and understand that nobody ever chooses to have this disease. It's a disease that does not discriminate. It is one of the only diseases that does not discriminate. It does not care what age you are, what gender you are, what your socioeconomic background, your religion, your race, it does not matter. It impacts people equally. And how I categorize it sometimes as addiction, alcoholism is a thief. They're thieves. They rob us of really beautiful, wonderful people. So what can we do about this? What are some of the challenges that our community faces, and what are some of the solutions to this? So when you're looking at treatment and sometimes the challenges, you can look at treatment as a continuum. Some people need residential treatment. They need to be completely physically separated for a period of time to receive treatment. They need to detox medically. Some people can step down to what they call partial hospitalization, or to an IOP, which is intensive outpatient, or to outpatient programming. One of the challenges that we face here in the state of Maryland, and unfortunately we are not unique in this, is access to care. And one of the biggest challenges that our country is facing, and not just Maryland, is access to treatment for adolescents. There used to be, 5 years ago, there used to be 5 residential inpatient programs that would treat adolescents in recovery, trying to be in recovery from substance use disorder. There were 5. There's only one. And the challenge here is that it is not accessible to all. It will not take state insurance. It only takes private insurance. There are no residential treatment programs for adolescents in the state of Maryland that will take Medicare and Medicaid. There is not equal access to treatment in the state. And the unfortunate reality is that this is not unique to Maryland. This is happening across the country. What recovery can look like are these treatment programs, recovery housing. There are places actually in Boston. They have a really incredible and dynamic, Boston and actually Houston, Texas, have a really dynamic and remarkable community for especially young people in recovery. They have access to residential treatment programs. They have access to recovery housing. And then they also have a whole continuum of care for young people. They also have access to recovery high schools where young people can attend high school in an environment with other young people who are working programs of recovery with them. There are other kinds of recovery besides like clinical settings or recovery high schools, or what we call halfway houses. There's mutual support groups, like 12-step programs, which I'm sure many of you have heard of, like Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous. There's Celebrate Recovery, Refuge Recovery, Al-Anon. There are a lot of different kinds of mutual support groups that are out there for folks. If you wanted to continue to educate yourself about this, there are a couple of really fantastic documentaries out there. One is called Anonymous People, and it gives stories of other folks in recovery. Another one is called Generation Found, and the tagline here is "Just Say No" is a slogan. This is a revolution. This is about recovery high schools, specifically in Houston. It actually also talks about the disparity between the haves and the have-nots. How there's a recovery high school in the wealthy, the rich part of town, but there was no access to services in the other lower socioeconomic parts of town. And it talks about how the community is trying to come together to resolve that issue. And I have 2 minutes left. Perfect. Okay, great. Some of the other things that I want to highlight that are happening within our Frederick community that I feel are bringing a lot of hope. There's a lot of change that needs to happen because there is not equal access to care within the state when it comes especially to young people in recovery. There is the Phoenix Recovery Academy that just opened about a year ago. I got to be the co-founder and had the honor of being the head of school at this at the school for their first year. There's just started their second year, and this is a high school like any other high school, right in downtown Frederick, and they serve adolescents who are in recovery from substance use disorder. There's also Lotus Preparatory Academy in Baltimore, Maryland. They are not yet opened, but they're hoping to open next year. There is I have seen is an increase in recovery housing in Frederick, specifically in the past couple of years, an increase in recovery housing for women with children. In Frederick County and in the state of Maryland, for a lot of years, there were a handful of recovery housing, so halfway housing for women with children. That was not necessarily really accessible. That can be a big barrier for women trying to get into treatment, is a lot of programs will not take their children. There now are some programs, at least 2 or 3 houses in Frederick that will take women with children. There's also an increase in outpatient services here in Frederick as well. This community has been pretty fantastic, I will say, in terms of the acceptance, the lack of stigma that gets placed on people in recovery in Frederick. It's been pretty fantastic, which is why I think a lot of these organizations have been able to open and be supported by the local community here. Oh, and my last slide is not popping up. I will just talk really quickly about my last slide. I feel like this is really apropos as well, is that August 31st is International Overdose Awareness Day, and September coming up is National Recovery Month. So if you wanted to do some more research or learn some more about this, there are some events that are happening locally around both International Overdose Awareness Day and National Recovery Month this September. So again, thank you so much for being here, for listening, for your time, your energy, and your attention. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Sara.
And I will go ahead and put my email, since my last slide didn't pop up. Can I put that in the chat?
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.